So it turns out that there's about 100 different variations or possible outcomes for the pattern of Feline Stomp. The way it works is that this first stem section is always guaranteed. You'll always have at least two. So if you think about these little circles as the egg-shaped pattern that repeats itself, you'll always get at least two. And then there's the option for the third, and then there's the option for either no branches, a left branch, a right branch, as well as a second set of branches further down. And then each of those branches can have a circle pattern on them which extends the coverage of Feline Stomp. Or if you get unlucky like this, you just get no branches at all and only the stem. So you can have a Feline Stomp that covers this much area, or one that covers this much area, and many combinations in between. From my testing, you can only get one of the extra circle patterns on one of the branches. And while I like the kind of visual variation, I mean, I think everyone likes the visuals of Feline Stomp. It isn't particularly monk-y, but it is a nice looking spell, especially the sword pattern. That's my favorite. And I like the fact that it's different every time you press it for the most part. The problem I have is that, like I said, sometimes you get a tiny area to play around and sometimes you get a large one. Sometimes you get a short one, sometimes you get a long one, sometimes you have room to move on the left and the right, or sometimes not, or either or. It's all random. As far as how much you can move on Feline Stomp, it's fairly forgiving, actually. You can move about this far off it, about half of the distance of the fronds away from the center stem, and still keep the buff. But the main problem I have is that it's not always possible to get the length right for guessing where movement's going to go or where the mobs are that you want the Feline Stomp to be. And it's also not really possible to guarantee you to get any movement on the opposite axis. So you can almost always guarantee that you get some mobility back and forward, but you can't guarantee side to side. For the most part, this isn't a problem, but it's one of those things that I don't see the point in having the variability or variation there. It doesn't add anything to gameplay, it just sometimes feels bad. I would really like to see this changed so that the graphic can keep changing and everything, that's fine. But I would love it if whenever you press Feline Stomp, you just gained these buffs, the Ancient Concordance and Awakened Feline. If you've talented into them, you just gain the buffs for 30 seconds. That way the visual variation could still be there, but you wouldn't have to specifically play around the graphic itself all the time. I think Ruby Life Pools is actually a pretty good example of where Feline Stomp struggles. There's a lot of ground AoE mechanics, along with Quaking this week, or Sanguine in the coming weeks, or Storming and things like that. There's a lot of movement required in some of these dungeons, and if you're playing a Feline Stomp build, a full Fistweaving build, the fact that you basically have a very limited amount of space to play on can feel pretty bad, especially for a healer that is supposed to be a mobile healer. The other possibility is to effectively make this a radial AoE. So even if the graphics stayed the same, making this something that could possibly sprout from all directions around the monk, or even just keeping it the way it is but making the buff if it needs to remain a ground effect. Make it possible so that we can move left to right without losing the buff. The second layer of RNG that goes into Fistweaving builds at the moment is to do with Ancient Teachings. Unfortunately, Ancient Teachings is a smart heal in that it will always prioritize injured allies within 30 yards, but it doesn't prioritize the most injured. After playing Preservation of Ochre a fair bit this week, having things like Emerald Communion that will always prioritize your own health pool and then will always prioritize the lowest health target or the lowest health ally within range has been very feels good. It's dependable, which is great. And that's probably the one major complaint I have with Feline Stomp, is that it just isn't dependable. Sometimes you get the super long one, sometimes, like I said, you only get the narrow line, sometimes you get some ability to play around left and right, so you can kind of work around all axes. You can go left, right, back, forth, whatever, and then other times you don't get any of those options at all. The other kind of, I guess, problem with this also being that Feline Stomp is still on a 30-second cooldown. I guess none of this would be as bad if the cooldown was significantly reduced or there just wasn't a cooldown at all. I know it's visually nice, and I know this was meant to be like a fun Covenant ability when it was originally designed, but for something so integral to the Monk's kit or the Fistweaver's toolkit, having it just randomly, like if this is all you proc, this is such a small area to play around for effectively your whole end of tier talent build. This would be like if Holy Paladin sometimes pressed Consecration and got a smaller circle, or sometimes got a rectangle instead of the radial AoE, or Resto Druids dropped their efflorescence and sometimes it was a triangle shape, and sometimes it was like a weird diamond, and sometimes it was a square or a tiny circle. It just doesn't make any sense to have that kind of randomness built into healers especially. So please, Blizzard, take a look at this, and thanks for watching, and algorithm stuff.